just to complete the endocrine system. Now, so the first thing is to tell you that the adrenal gland is one of only a few slides in your box that has an outer cortex, which is this area here, an outer cortex, and an inner medulla. One of the few slides in the box, maybe about 5 or so slides, possess a medulla and an outer cortex. One of the big difference between the adrenal gland and the other one with the cortex and the medulla is that the cortex of the adrenal is always, or I should say usually, much paler than the medulla. So the cortex of the adrenal gland is pale, that the medulla tends to be a little darker. Now you obviously know why is it that the adrenal cortex is paler than the medulla, because the cortex produces mainly steroids. And these steroidal substances possess a lipid base, and this lipid gets dissolved in perspiration. Okay, so the first thing is that the adrenal cortex is invested in a capsule of connective tissue that you can see here. Not a very well developed, but nonetheless very obvious. It's an obvious connective tissue capsule. Then beneath the capsule now we encounter the cortex. So the cortex stretches from right there all the way down there. So it's a quite thick cortex. Now this cortex is divided into 3 zones. This peripheral zone here, so I'm going up slightly higher fall. This peripheral zone is known as the zone of glomerulosa. So the zone of glomerulosa is composed of short clusters of columnar cells, and these cells now are juxtaposed to fenestrated capillaries. Again, being endocrine, that's a general recurring theme. Then radiating downwards now from the glomerulosa, we have the thickest of the 3 layers, which is the zona fasciculata. So the zona fasciculata. The zona fasciculata is composed of, as I said, radiating cords of cells. And if you observe these cells, you'll see that first of all, these cells tend to be quite pale. These cells are pale because the concentration and the hormone produced by these cells is more steroid than the other 2 layers. So this is really good. A good example of what a steroid producing cell should look like. Pale. The other thing you may want to ask yourself is, why is it that I'm seeing some cells in the fasciculata that are paler than others? So, for example, this one I'm pointing at is very pale, and then this one is pale, yes, but not as pale. This one here. Some of the things we ask account for the difference in the intensity of the staining in this level. And it's due to the fact that concentration of the hormone in the 2 cells are different. Also, this layer of cells is intimately associated with numerous fenestrated capillaries as well. Oh, I should emphasize that you have done the physiology, so you should be aware of these substances that are produced by these different layers. So you know that it's the mineralocorticoids that are produced by the glomerulosa. The chiefest of those is the aldosterone. And then in the fasciculata now we have the glucocorticoids, cortisol and corticosterone. And then we go on to the zona reticularis. What you'll see is this zona reticularis is composed of anastomosing cords of cells. Anastomosing cords of cells. Anastomosing cords of cells. And again, these cells are associated with capillaries. These cords. Also, juxtaposed to these are a well-developed network of capillaries. This zona reticularis produces their androgens, but be mindful of the fact that there's a little overlap between the two layers, the fasciculata and the reticulars. The fasciculata producing a little bit of androgen, the reticulars a little bit of the glucocorticoid. Then we get down now into the medulla. So I'll go back on a low power for you to see that this medulla stains quite differently from the cells in the cortex. Also note these large holes in the medulla. These are your actually part of your medullary vein. Medullary vein. So the medullary vein is what is giving all these luminal structures. Also, the medulla is composed of two kinds of cells. And two kinds are not always obvious, but I've brought one slide that I think we can differentiate the two kinds. Generally, in the medulla we find chromaffin cells. So chromaffin cells, those are the cells that produce your epinephrine and norepinephrine. But these would be the cells you're looking at right now. Those are chromaffin cells. Also, there are ganglion cells within the medulla as well. These ganglion cells are the ones that are difficult to find. I brought a slide that you can see them. And of course, this now is a good example of a capillary with RBCs in it. Now, usually in the human subject and in some other animal subjects, the medullary vein shows a very thick tunica media, which is not the usual thing. The veins tend to have a thin tunica media. So the medullary vein tends to be much thicker than usual veins. Alright? And you will want to remind yourself of the embryological origin of the medulla as opposed to the cortex. Now, topographically speaking, we could encounter something outside of the capsule of the adrenal gland. Several things. One of them is on this slide. So I have observed this structure here outside of the capsule. So it's easy now that we could do that. So what we could do sometimes is give you a panoramic view. So you can see the adrenal and I will ask you to identify the structure just to the left of the field or whatever. That would be this structure here. So when we examine the structure, the first thing that strikes me would be the presence of these large large cells, and each of these cells possessing a pale nucleus and a darkly stained nucleolus. So this is obviously a ganglion. You might want to know which specific ganglion would this be. And this obviously would be the celiac ganglion. So that's the celiac ganglion. That's some of the things you want to be able to answer now. And the examiner asks you to identify the structure at the very tip of the pointer. That's that little dot you see there. That dot is a cell that's surrounding the cell body. So that would be a satellite cell.